It's dangerous to go alone. Better subscribe and join the over 30,000 who already have, and you'll hear about more videos like this as soon as they're out. The Legend of Zelda has a storied legacy, yet despite that, the series hasn't had many spin-offs. Only a couple hack and slashes, a motion control shooting gallery, and a surprise indie rhythm roguelike, and a few more we don't talk about. But there's one genre I've always thought Zelda could pull off, a spin-off fighting game. With such a huge cast of memorable characters across almost 40 years of history, there's a ton of potential waiting to be tapped. So let's go over what such a game might look like, including game mechanics and modes, design details, and, most importantly, the roster itself. Ready? Let's get this quest started. But first, we should establish our ground rules. This'll be a quote-quote 2.5D fighter. 2D gameplay, 3D graphics. We'll be aiming for a pace of play close to modern Street Fighter, with a balance of strong fundamentals and shorter, but still flashy and flow-heavy, combos and strings. As you saw a moment ago, we have a base roster of 25 characters, reasonably sized for the first ever Zelda fighting game, if on the bigger side, with enough room for obvious inclusions, fan favorites, and a couple surprises. Most of the characters will come from all across the series' history, with a few original generation versions specific to the game. Yeah, this takes place in an era and a Hyrule we haven't seen before. Main plot involves the bad guys creating portals to summon armies of monsters from other ages and timelines, with some heroes from those eras also getting dragged into the conflict. Each character in this game is split into one of 4 classes, based on which aspect of the Triforce fits them best. Courage-type fighters want to get into the fray and make stuff happen. These characters are all about rushdown, hit-and-run, or aggressive footsies. Wisdom-type fighters are the opposite. These are zoners, trappers, and setup-based characters who hang back, disrupt opponents, and win through strategy and mind games. Power-type fighters are your big bruisers and grapplers. They have to work harder to get going, but once that momentum is there, they can dominate the match. And then there are balance-type fighters, who don't embody any one particular aspect. Some are well-rounded jacks of all trades, while others are more unusual. Got all that? Now, let's go over our first playable fighters. The Link of this era still has room to grow. First one in a while to be in the middle of adolescence, which helps him stand out from any other Links. His inexperience also means he doesn't yet embody the Triforce of Courage. This makes him a balanced type and the roster's most beginner-friendly fighter, which makes sense since new players will gravitate toward him. With a good mix of attacks, a few classic techniques like the spin attack and sword thrusts, and a bow and arrows for simple Hadouken-like projectiles, he's got a little of everything. All in all, a great pick for fighting game newcomers to get their feet wet. The Princess of Hyrule in this time is also untested, but wisdom beyond her years means she was prepared for forces of evil to show up. She's another original design. The ultimate render is just a close enough comparison. The poster child of the Wisdom class, Zelda uses an enchanted scepter to guide the elements to her will. With it, she creates fireballs, electric surges, and more to lock down the battlefield and keep opponents at bay. For those who love being in control and staying one step ahead of opponents, she's a great place to start. Bucking the trends just like Link and Zelda, this Ganondorf is a little younger than usual. Still a legit threat though, a charismatic yet ruthless ruler from the desert who launched an attack on Hyrule at the behest of a mysterious robed sorcerer whose magic created the space-time portals. Ganondorf himself is no slouch on the battlefield, embodying the power class with sluggish mobility but strong physical strikes and a massive greatsword. He even taps into dark magic for a few moves. Not as skilled with it as other incarnations, but he's been using it more as of late. Is Demise's curse taking hold of him once again? That's our last of the new characters. This version of Impa is from the age of Skyward Sword. That design's always been a fan favorite. Just like she protected the Zelda of that time, she senses this age's Zelda could also use a highly trained Sheikah bodyguard and offers her services. Embodying the Courage class, Impa is an aggressive attacker who gets up close, tries to land a few hits, then retreats for a moment if it doesn't work out. Her moveset interweaves classic ninja techniques with some magic ability, including an explosive made of solidified light or a protective barrier that reduces damage from certain enemy attacks, letting her pivot right back to offense. Here's a surprise. Hard to call Saria a deep cut with how famous her game is, but she's flown under the radar in other Zelda spin-offs. Missed out on Hyrule Warriors, but this game has room enough in its roster. As a childlike forest spirit, Saria is one of the smallest characters on the roster, which means she can slip around enemy attacks and approach with ease. As the Sage of the Forest, her dominion over plant life grants her powers to fight with, like summoning thorn bushes from the ground, using a Deku stick that grows leaves and flowers when she wills it, and even getting the Deku tree sprout to help with her strongest moves. Here's our roster so far. I know it doesn't look like much, but we have a lot of room to grow. Any guesses who's next? Every fighting game needs a signature mechanic. Super meters are a common thing, and many fighters put their own spins on that idea. You can see where this is going, right? Allow me to introduce the Force Gauge. This measure of golden power builds up as you deal damage, block attacks, get hit, have your attacks get blocked, etc. You can fill the gauge up to 3 times total, since 3 is kind of a big number in this series. Free to expend it immediately or save it for the next round. What do you spend the meter on? Force attacks are this game's super moves, 3 total per character, costing 1, 2, and 3 bars a meter respectively. You've heard about a couple already. Impa's Barrier and Saria's Deku Sprout Summon are a couple of theirs. Most characters' level 1 force attacks are an enhanced version of one of their specials, while levels 2 and 3 are stronger and completely unique. But there's one more thing you can spend meter on, and it varies by class. Courage-type fighters get Force Dash, an instant burst of movement that, when used right, lets you instantly bypass enemy defenses. Wisdom-type fighters get Force Barrier, an emergency defensive wall that endures a certain amount of total damage. Power-type fighters get Force Blast, an area attack with a burning aura that has partial super armor. Finally, balance-type fighters get Force Boost, a temporary buff to their mobility and damage output. Simple, but effective. Now, how about more characters? We can't neglect the latest games, now with how popular they've been. Tall and imposing, yet resolute and level-headed, Lady Urbosa is a force in battle who lends her hand in this new conflict. The Gerudo champion fights with a balanced footsies-based playstyle, using her scimitar and shield to pivot between aggressive strikes and defensive spacing based on what the situation calls for. Combining this with her unique ability to create and control lightning lets Urbosa do plenty of extra stuff, electrifying her weapon to make her next move deal extra stun, calling down lightning bolts that force foes sitting at long range to get closer, all part of her repertoire. Urbosa's not the only champion here. Wouldn't feel right to have a Zelda fighting game without a playable Goron. We've had a couple of tall characters so far, but Daruk is our first legit super heavy, with a huge build and a ton of health even compared to other taller fighters. Big bodies usually struggle to get in, but Daruk might be the exception. He's a defensive juggernaut with shorter combos, but armor frames for days for tanking weaker hits with his rock-hard body and rolling over the competition. And his signature power fits right in as a force attack. Daruk's protection applies passive armor that prevents weak knockback at all times until it's broken by enough total damage. Meanwhile, from other games, this Zora princess and sage embodies the elegance and flow of water. While the Link of her time isn't here, Rudo's duty to safeguard Hyrule doesn't change in this new era, and she'll fulfill that duty here. Expanding further on her moveset from the first Hyrule warriors, Rudo shapes water into many forms for attacking and zoning. From simple splashes and waves, to a current that pushes foes away, to elaborate fountains sprouting from the ground. We can even give her some ice powers as a nod to the cave in the back of her domain, freezing her creations to create damaging explosions or slippery terrain that can tilt fights in her favor. Yeah, no surprise that there's more than one here. We've had so many versions of Link that of course another stumbled through the portals, even one like the Hero of Winds who's technically not a reincarnation. Another of the roster's resident short guys, Toon Link takes full advantage of being so tricky to hit. His moveset is a remix of the OG Links, with some similar moves but plenty of Wind Waker specific stuff, like using the grappling hook to pull opponents toward him, the Deku Leaf as an emergency mid-air hover, or the Wind Waker itself to create updrafts and speed boosting tailwinds. And yes, he has the Hurricane Spin for a force attack. One more from Ocarina of Time. In a bit of dramatic irony, no one in this game figures out Sheik's true identity other than OG Zelda. This princess in hiding, masquerading as a Sheikah vigilante, has unique skills from her unique circumstances. Basically, despite Sheik and Impa having similar vibes, they play differently. This is a bearer of the Triforce of Wisdom, and Sheik reflects that by being more tactical, wearing foes down with needles and projectiles from a distance. Her harp also comes out for different specials, playing melodies that enhance and add elements to certain moves temporarily. Makes for a flexible zoner who can tailor her kit to the matchup or situation. Turns out a few major villains also emerged from the portals, and thanks to Ganondorf's mysterious advisor, they're working together for now, despite all having plans to betray each other. Skull Kid, though, is mostly just looking to wreak havoc in this new world, and the mask possessing him has its own agenda. If you think that sounds like a crazy fighter who keeps foes guessing at every turn, then you're right. With mix-ups and mind games for days, Skull Kid's dark magic pulls the rug out from under opponents, laughing as he pulls off big hits and combos. He can also mess with opponents directly, with specials that inflict debuffs or make their force gauges temporarily unusable. Here's where the roster stands now. Almost half filled out, and the cast is getting interesting already. Any of your favorites here yet? This next idea is kind of out there, but indulge me. Some fighting games let you call in assist characters, right? Well, what if our Zelda fighting game instead had assist items? When choosing your character, you'd also be able to select one of several iconic series items, and once per round, you could use it for a unique attack. For example, the boomerang would be a simple yet reliable projectile, crossing the screen for one hit, then coming back to you for another. Rock's cape and the double jump it grants give your character an emergency extra jump for air mobility and faking out approaches. The claw shot launches forward to try and grab an opponent. If it does, it pulls you right up to them for a built-in follow-up attack. And the Giant's Knife gives you a powerful forward strike unless it touches any enemy attacks in the process, at which point it breaks. Each item would fit into one of the character classes. If the item you choose matches your fighter's class, it's made more effective, which makes for meaningful decisions. Do you want something that plays to your character's established role, like a courage type taking Pegasus boots for a forward sprint? Or something off-style that reaches outside your class, like a wisdom type taking power bracelets for a single-use command grab? The potential is endless. Reminds me of someone else whose arsenal is nearly endless. Yeah, I wasn't gonna pass up on this guy. The base roster's Adult Link stands out visually, and his moveset fully embodies the game that redefined the open-world adventure genre. Having roamed the ruins of Hyrule, this Link has an inventory full of discarded weapons to whip out for different attacks. And by holding the button down for some of them, he can wind up and throw that weapon instead as a powerful projectile that breaks on contact. And his force attacks get really crazy with Sheikah Slate runes, like using Magnesis to swing a giant box around, or freezing his opponent with stasis, then going wild with a rapid flurry of strikes that take effect all at once. The Zelda of the Wild era is also here, but she's coming from Tears of the Kingdom, which matters a lot because that game is where she learned to fully utilize her magical talents. With her natural aptitude boosted by her Zonai Secret Stone, this Sage of Time uses her control over time, and some light magic as well, to their fullest. I can see her stopping an enemy projectile in its tracks with Recall and returning it to sender, or casting magic for a special, then warping it into the future to reappear a few seconds later. And her level 3 force attack calls upon remnant memories of, well, if you know, you know. Those of you who've played Link's Awakening are probably thinking, how is she here? Guess those portals also reached into the dream world. Or maybe I just wanted a character here from an older Zelda game. Going even further with music motifs than Sheik does, Marin's moveset utilizes the instruments of the sirens to create damaging sound waves and glowing astral energy. With an angelic voice and dance-like movements, playing her well can be a dreamlike experience itself, one with the occasional twist. Her first 2 force attacks show a surprisingly violent side, and her level 3 calls in the Windfish himself. Has he been watching all along? Time to correct more of Hyrule Warriors' mistakes. One of that game's most glaring omissions, Groose is finally loose. Pulled from a point after Skyward Sword, he's here with character development intact to prove he can help out even without supernatural powers. A pugilist in a roster full of weapon users, Groose works his way in carefully, then lays the smack down with some special gloves and boots he custom built to make his attacks hit extra hard. And he has a little wisdom to augment that power, with specials that utilize different gadgets to further overcome his physical limits. And yes, he fires the Crucinator for his level 3 force attack. Another playable villain, Girahim pledged himself to Ganondorf's cause shortly after arriving, but he too has his own goals, sensing an opportunity to further exert his master's will and spitefully undo the goddess Hylia's handiwork by bringing this Hyrule to ruin. Much like his boss fights in Skyward Sword, Girahim has a no-nonsense swordplay style focused on Footsie's fundamentals. With practiced sword strikes supplemented by diamond-shaped demonic magic, his mastery of mid-range combat puts foes on their back foot. And he has something extra, an install where he takes on his spirit form to become faster, stronger, and gain new attacks, at the cost of constantly draining his force gauge until it's depleted. Roster's really filling out now, isn't it? And we have a surprise or two still in store, so keep watching. We've talked about the game's plot, but how about the story mode itself? Sure, we could do the usual fighting game thing, with a chain of character fights connected with text and cutscenes, but what if we could make it more Zelda-like? Imagine, if you will, a full-on adventure mode, a 2D top-down quest featuring Link, able to swap to others as they join up, with a modest-sized overworld to explore, NPCs to talk to, and secrets to find and side quests to complete for rewards. There'd also be combat, with a twist. Touching any enemies would draw you into battle against all of them currently on screen, which would play out using the 2D fighting game mechanics. These enemies would have unique models, but simplistic movesets pulled from the kits of playable characters, like Bokoblins using a couple Deku Stick attacks borrowed from Saria, or Wizrobes pulling from certain magic users, as well as some with single original attacks, like Keese flying overhead who swoop at you when you jump. They'd be simple to make, relatively, and be a means to teach players how to beat different fighting styles. Your first Wizrobe encounter could include tips on how to fight enemy zoners, or facing a big moblin could also teach how to keep grapplers from getting their hands on you. And this would come to a head in the dungeons, 3 in total, with the usual forest, fire, and water themes, featuring puzzles to solve and enemies to fight, culminating in a boss fight against one of Ganondorf's enforcers. Overall, it'd be a bite-sized Zelda adventure built into the game. Now, how about more characters? Our fourth Link is the most unique yet. A shapeshifter with a fan-favorite companion in tow, this dynamic duo is teaming up once more. Why are Link and Midna both stuck in their cursed forms again? Some greater sorcery is at play. Making the best of their situation, this rider and mount fighter has an odd mix of attacks. Link's bites and tackles are quick but short-ranged, while Midna's Twilight Magic and hair attacks have greater reach but slower speed. And the pair's force attacks combine their abilities in unique ways, like summoning a soul sphere that Link volleys into the enemy, or warping in a piece of a bridge to drop onto them. Didn't think I'd forget him, did you? Prince Sidon gained a following in no time flat, and Tears of the Kingdom expanded his role, with him becoming a Sage of Water himself. He's different enough from the Zora character we already have for both to coexist. While Ruto keeps her distance in combat, Sidon is a duelist who actively protects those he cares about. Wielding a Zora trident with decades of practice, he backs up his spear attacks by bending water in different ways than Ruto does, like creating a liquid barrier that becomes a projectile shaped by your next attack, or a force attack where he forms a watery shark to crash down. Rounding out the Wild Era cast is this Rito fledgling with incredible archery skills and the wind itself at his wingtips. Thanks to learning some humility while fighting alongside Link, this newly ascended Sage of Wind has become wiser and more level-headed. But it's Tulin's unorthodox fighting style that helps him stand out. He hovers for his grounded animations, which means low attacks go under him, and with advanced aerial movement, multiple mid-air jumps, and forming gusts of wind to further aid his movement, Tulin has plenty of ways to create space for sniping at foes with precise arrow shots. Just don't let anyone get up in his face. Low health and weak CQC are a bad combination. A shopkeep from a parallel world, Ravio lacks the courage of his brethren, but he'll help out when push comes to shove. While part of his kit parallels the human form Link's, his moves themselves are built around different weaponry. Lacking a sword and shield, Ravio's weapon of choice is a magic hammer, and he whips out other items for other attacks and specials, like swinging a sand rod to create a quick obstruction, or using the tornado rod's rising motion as a makeshift uppercut. And his first force attack actually lets him upgrade a couple items to make associated attacks stronger, but only until that round is over, because getting KO'd resets them. The Zelda from Spirit Tracks joins the fight by making the most of a bad situation. After dark magic separated her soul from her body, she learned how to inhabit and control armored constructs known as phantoms. And since the Triforce is out of the picture in her Hyrule, she's free to use powers unrelated to it. Our only female power-type fighter so far uses strong blows from her Phantom Vessel's armaments, and something extra. She's figured out how to modify this particular Phantom to take on traits of the other types in Spirit Tracks, bowling foes over with the Wrecker's ball form, sending out a flying sentry with the ability to warp to it, and more help keep this powerhouse princess on track. Ganondorf's third enforcer, Zant, immediately pledged loyalty to him upon arriving in hopes of gaining further power. This Ganondorf lacks the godlike power of the one from the Twilight era, but the Usurper King of the Twilight is on board anyway, and he's every bit as unhinged as always. A balanced type in name only, Zant's moveset actually leans hard into each of the other three classes in fragmented, incomplete fashion, just like how crazed his boss fight is. Hacking away with rapid swings of dual swords, turning giant for single overwhelming blows, and summoning replicas of his helmet to act as turrets, all combined for a moveset of extremes that only barely holds together. Our roster's almost complete now. Those last three spots are very important, but to explain why, we have to talk about where the story ends up. After clearing the 3 dungeons and obtaining the obligatory magic artifacts within, Link and his allies take the fight directly to the bad guys. Storming Ganondorf's fortress, they're faced with dark magic, sinister traps, and the strongest monsters yet, all testing everything players have learned so far in typical Zelda fashion. Breaching the innermost sanctum, Link is suddenly beset by a dark doppelganger of himself. Overcoming this effigy of his inner demons, he proves himself worthy to stand alongside his other incarnations. All that's left is to face Ganondorf in combat, and after their toughest battle yet, our heroes triumph. And that's where things go off the rails. That mysterious sorcerer from before? He's been the one pulling strings all along, manipulating this version of Ganondorf and creating the space-time portals by his own hand, all to advance his own goals. His true identity? Someone I'm certain you did not see coming. Remember that boss from Zelda 2 you beat by reflecting his magic back at him? I expanded on his lore. A lot. Now a former Hyrulean royal advisor who tried to usurp the throne. As punishment, he was executed and had his soul bound to the Ocean Palace. But he used strange magic to slip through time and space, and now he's orchestrated a grand plot to take revenge on this Hyrule by proxy. A disembodied soul shrouded in tattered robes, Karak wields the same wicked magic that other enemy casters have used across the series, exploding clusters of energy, flames that linger in place, even warping around using the very portals that summoned his armies. And yes, he has a dead man's volley attack, a magic projectile that can be reflected exactly twice, once by his foe, then once more by himself. But Karak isn't the only threat, because as he falls and tries to conjure one more portal, someone else hijacks the plot. In classic Zelda fashion, Ganon has taken over the endgame as the true final boss. This incarnation from A Link to the Past has already corrupted one realm, and now he aims to claim this era's Triforce 2 for himself. An imposing presence like no other, Ganon is the roster's other giant-sized super heavy, giving even Daruk a run for his money. And his moveset is armed to the teeth with iconic attacks from his boss fights, summoning a swarm of fiery bats, throwing his cursed trident to force foes to defend, and teleporting forward so no feeble zoning attempts can keep him out. True to form, it'd take a steady mind, a hero's resolve, and potentially some matchup practice to fell this greatest of evils for good. But we have one more roster spot left, right? So who's left to... oh. Guess who stumbled into a portal and got wrapped up in all this? Tingle's a memorable part of Zelda history, so no surprise this map-making man-child with delusions of riches and fairyhood has found his way here. As the roster's joke character but not really, Tingle has a lot of weird attacks, from flailing around like a wimp to tackling people butt first to swinging balloons and money bags around. He'd have odd hitboxes and off-kilter frame data everywhere that are actually effective once you wrap your head around them, culminating in a level 1 force attack where he does his Kulu Limpa dance, ending in an explosion sometimes. But if you want to be a troll, what better way to BM your opponent than with a super that only has a chance to hurt them? There we are, a roster for a fighting game themed around The Legend of Zelda, comprised of 25 characters from across the series' storied history. With many fan favorites and a handful of surprises, we have a strong foundation, even if a few choices might spark some arguments. I didn't lean too hard on the Wild Era, did I? If the devs were up for it, DLC could add even more characters. Dark Link would be an easy free update Echo Fighter, and from there the game could have waves of paid content like most fighting games nowadays. Season 1 could feature Tetra, the pirate captain with an unknown royal heritage, Din, the dancing oracle of seasons, and the Wild Era version of Ganondorf, whose gloom magic decays his foes' health and stats. But how would you handle a roster like this? Am I onto something? Or am I just a fool who should talk as often as Link does? If you were impressed though, check out the previous roster videos I mentioned earlier. Interesting stuff, I promise. Special thanks to the following for helping make this video happen. Thanks especially to my patrons for the continued support. And now, it's their turn. Anyone currently backing me on Patreon for as little as $1 a month can vote on which of these 3 roster ideas gets to go next. That last one's a popular topic lately, huh? So, until next time, I'm worn out. Anyone got a blue potion?